He was 65, a janitor no one noticed, just an old man sweeping hangars in the snow. But when a Navy team was trapped in a canyon called the place that eats planes, he did the unthinkable. He climbed back into the A-10 he once flew, a relic no one believed could still rise. That night, over the mountains of Afghanistan, the world learned that some miracles are born from faith, not youth. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. The wind carried winter's voice across the flatlands of Idaho, a thin whistle weaving through frost-bitten fences and the silent hulks of parked aircraft. Dawn was only a gray whisper when Tom Walker, 65, swung his stiff legs off the narrow cot inside his one-room trailer at the edge of Mountain Home Air Base. He moved like an old hinge, deliberate, aching, but sure. Decades of discipline clung to him the way frost clung to the window pane. A dented kettle hissed on the stove, and the smell of instant coffee filled the air. Beside the heater, a German shepherd stirred, thick-coated and noble, his black and tan fur silvered at the muzzle. "Come on, Ranger," Tom murmured. The dog stretched, yawned, and pressed his nose into Tom's palm, a gesture of trust carved by years together since Ranger had been rescued from a decommissioned K-9 unit. The animal's right ear bent slightly forward, a permanent scar from a shrapnel blast years before. His eyes, amber and alert, were the only fire in the room. Outside, the world glimmered in shades of iron. Snow squeaked beneath boots. Each breath smoked like a confession. Tom wore the same olive parka he had bought when he still flew the A-10 Thunderbolt, back when people called him Hog Driver. The patch was faded now, edges frayed. Ranger trotted beside him, sniffing the frozen ground with the diligence of an old soldier. The air smelled of jet fuel, cold metal, and distant coffee from the mess hall. The base was quiet at this hour, young airmen still asleep or pretending to be. Tom preferred it that way. He liked the silence before machinery woke, when ghosts of engines seemed to breathe under their tarps. He had served 35 years in the Air Force, flown combat tours he never bragged about, and lost friends whose names he still whispered before bed. Retirement hadn't sat well with him, so when the base offered him janitorial work, he accepted without pride or shame. It kept his hands busy and his mind from unraveling in the long winters of memory. He and Ranger made their slow patrol toward Hangar 3, the largest on the west side. The snow on its roof glowed faint blue under the security lights. Tom swiped his badge, the scanner blinking lazy green. Inside, the cavernous space held the quiet reverence of a church. Rows of aircraft slept beneath sheets of dust, sleek modern fighters near the front, relics farther back. In the last bay stood the one that mattered, a retired A-10, its gray skin dulled, shark mouth chipped but defiant. The last plane Tom had ever flown. "Morning, old girl," he said softly. Ranger's tail gave a single wag, as if recognizing the ritual. Tom set down his cleaning cart, a clumsy thing of mops, rags, and degreaser bottles, and pulled a cloth from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from a tremor left by years of adrenaline and loss. He wiped frost from the canopy, revealing his own reflection. Deep-set blue, eyes, face weathered into a map of campaigns, gray beard trimmed short out of habit. There was strength still in his shoulders, though time had stolen speed. Sometimes he wondered if he kept cleaning the jet to preserve the version of himself that had flown it. "Morning, Chief," called a voice from behind. Private Cole Jennings, barely 20, sauntered in with a clipboard and too much swagger for the hour. Freckles, buzz cut, and the kind of grin that hadn't yet learned humility. Didn't know this hangar still had tenants. Tom straightened. Someone's got to keep her company. Cole laughed. Guess that's you and the mutt. Ranger's ears pricked, but Tom's tone stayed calm. He's got more service years than you, son. The kid blinked, mumbled something half apologetic, and disappeared toward the simulator bay. Ranger gave a low chuff, as if satisfied the skies were safe again. Tom chuckled, rubbing the dog's head. Don't waste a growl on rookies. They'll meet the world soon enough. He continued polishing the wing, slow circular motions that mirrored meditation. The metal beneath his palm was cold, yet familiar, the way a gravestone feels to those who visit often. His thoughts drifted to Mia, his 8-year-old granddaughter. She lived with her mother in Boise, sent him hand-drawn postcards covered in crooked hearts and crayon airplanes. The last one read, "Grandpa, when I grow up, can I fly with you?" He hadn't answered yet. He didn't know how to tell her that some skies never open again. Footsteps echoed across the hangar, crisp and deliberate. General Grace Whitman emerged from the light at the far end. Tall, mid-40s, with a posture that could slice the air. Her dark brown hair was twisted into a regulation bun, a single silver streak betraying years of command. She was the kind of woman whose eyes seemed always to be calculating, yet there was a quiet grace, fitting her name, in the way she carried authority. Rumor said she had once been a combat pilot before politics grounded her. "Walker," she greeted, her tone neutral, professional. "Didn't expect anyone here this early." "Old habits," Tom replied, not looking up from the wing. Grace's gaze drifted to the A-10. "You flew her, didn't you?" Tom hesitated, then nodded once. "Back when she had teeth." "She still does," Grace said softly, running a gloved hand along the fuselage. "People forget, but machines remember." Their eyes met briefly, hers sharp and searching, his guarded yet weary. There was recognition there, though neither voiced it. She turned away first. "We're holding a readiness inspection this week. Stay clear of this sector when it starts." "Yes, ma'am." After she left, the silence seemed heavier, full of things unsaid. Tom leaned against the nose of the jet, staring at the shadow her boots had left on the floor. Grace Whitman, he remembered that name from somewhere. Years ago, she had been a young lieutenant coordinating ground fire during a night operation in Kandahar. Her voice had been steady through chaos. He had never met her in person, but he had trusted that voice with his life. Maybe she didn't remember him. Maybe she did, and protocol kept her from saying it. Ranger whined softly, breaking his reverie. "Yeah, I know, boy. Time moves on." He packed up his tools, tugged his cap lower, and guided the cart toward the maintenance corridor. Through the windows, he watched daylight creep over the snow-covered tarmac. The young men would soon flood the base, loud and impatient, convinced the world would yield to their certainty. He envied them and pitied them all at once. Before leaving, Tom turned for one last look at the A-10. For a fleeting moment, he imagined it breathing. Hydraulics sighing, engines whispering, wings twitching against gravity's leash. He smiled, faint and private. "Sleep well, girl," he murmured. "World's quiet for now." Then he and Ranger stepped back into the cold, two old soldiers walking through a landscape of ice and memory, their footprints the only proof they were still here. The storm arrived without ceremony, dragging a curtain of white across the Idaho plains. Snow swirled around the hangars like restless spirits, and the wind hummed through the aluminum ribs of the old airfield. Inside Hangar 3, Tom Walker leaned on his mop handle, the radio crackling faintly in the corner beside the tool cart. He wasn't listening for news. He never did. But that morning, something in the static shifted, and a man's voice came through thin and jagged. SEAL Team Bravo 9, pinned in Sector 7C, casualties unknown. Tom froze. The mop dripped onto the concrete, each drop loud in the empty hangar. Ranger, his German shepherd, lifted his head and growled low, as if sensing the change before his master did. Tom turned toward the sound. The announcer's tone was clipped, military. Air support unavailable. Terrain classified as unrecoverable. Command pending response. The transmission ended in static. Tom exhaled slowly, pressing his thumb into his palm until the knuckles whitened. Sector 7C, the Red Pass. He knew that valley. He had flown over it once, years ago, when his squadron was still young enough to believe skill could outfly death. He'd lost 2 pilots there, friends who'd never made it back. Since then, 7C had lived in his bones like a wound that never quite healed. The hangar door opened with a groan, letting in a blast of cold wind. Sergeant Miles Reed, a mechanic built like a truck with a streak of oil on his cheek and the soft eyes of a man who'd seen too much loss, stomped in. Reed was 40, short-cropped hair, beard salted with gray, hands always stained no matter how often he washed them. "You hear it?" he asked, rubbing his palms near the space heater. Tom nodded once. "Heard enough." Reed sighed. "Command centers lit up like Christmas. They're saying it's another mess no one wants to clean." He looked around at the silent planes, his voice lowering. "Sometimes I think these new kids don't understand. Steel don't fly without ghosts pushing it." Tom didn't answer. His eyes were on the A-10, the warthog that had carried him through storms no weather map could chart. The old jet seemed to stare back, its faded shark mouth smirking through the dust. Reed followed his gaze and grunted. "That beast'll outlast all of us." Then, softer, "You think they'll send anyone?" Tom shook his head. "They'll talk until the talking stops meaning anything." On the far side of the base, in the command operations room, the air vibrated with urgency. Screens flickered with satellite feeds, red dots marking enemy clusters. Colonel Ryan Maddox, a man in his early 50s with iron-gray hair and the kind of jawline carved from duty, paced beside a digital map. Maddox had once been a flight leader under whom few men smiled and none disobeyed. Combat had carved the empathy out of him. All that remained was precision. "We've lost comms with Bravo 9 for 6 minutes, he barked. "We need eyes in the air." Around him, officers shuffled papers, avoiding his stare. Major Elise Turner, the operations analyst, slender and sharp-featured with copper hair pulled tight, scanned telemetry data. Her voice trembled just slightly. "Sir, there's no pilot cleared for that canyon route. It's an uncharted turbulence zone, 5 confirmed aircraft down over 5 years." Maddox's eyes narrowed. "Then find me a pilot who's not afraid of ghosts." In the hangar, Tom could hear the muffled rumble of engines warming from the runway. He crouched to tie a loose strap on his boot, his joints cracking like old hinges. Ranger nudged him with a cold nose. "Not today, boy," Tom murmured. Yet his stomach twisted with something restless, an ache he hadn't felt since combat, that blend of dread and calling. He told himself it was just memory, nothing more. The door clanged again. Grace Whitman entered, her winter coat unbuttoned, boots tracing firm prints through melting snow. She didn't wear rank in moments like this. She carried it. "Walker," she called, voice even. Tom straightened. "Ma'am." You shouldn't be here this late. Storm keeps a man awake. Grace's gaze drifted to the A-10 again. You flew one of these into 7C, didn't you? It wasn't a question. Tom hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. I read the after-action report, Grace continued. You brought your wingman home on fumes. Her tone softened for the first time that morning. That was 20 years ago. Tom's jaw tightened. Ghosts don't keep calendars, ma'am. For a moment, silence hung between them, the kind that carried respect and regret in equal measure. Grace studied his face, tracing the lines carved by too many missions and too few good nights' sleep. We might need someone who remembers that terrain, she said quietly. Tom's eyes hardened. You've got better men for that now. No one remembers 7C. Then let it stay forgotten. Grace left without answering, her silhouette swallowed by the storm outside. Reed whistled low. If they're talking to you, Tom, they're desperate. Desperation kills more pilots than missiles, Tom replied. He tried to return to cleaning, but his hands wouldn't steady. The mop clattered against the bucket, echoing in the vast hangar. Ranger tilted his head, ears twitching, a low whine escaping. Tom crouched beside him, rubbing the fur behind his neck. Easy, pal. We're done with that life. But even as he said it, he heard himself lying. By nightfall, the base was a snow-wrapped island of light in a sea of dark. In the barracks cafeteria, the younger airmen talked over dinner about the lost SEAL team, voices eager and uncertain, like children whispering ghost stories. Tom sat alone near the window, a paper cup of coffee cooling beside him. Outside, snowflakes pressed against the glass like silent, please. Across the room, Ethan Hale, tall, late 30s, strong jaw shadowed by stubble, entered in full combat fatigues. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been tested by fire. When his gaze met Tom's, recognition sparked. Sir, Ethan said, crossing over. Tom blinked. I haven't been sir in a long time. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe not by rank, but you once pulled my unit out of a canyon no one thought survivable. Afghanistan, 7C. Tom frowned, memories flickering. You were the radio officer? Corpsman, actually. You covered our retreat when the birds went down. I never got to thank you. Ethan extended his hand, firm and calloused. Tom hesitated, then shook it. Bravo 9, Ethan continued. They're my men now. The words landed heavy. We lost comms at 0700, command stalling, but I know that look. They're writing obituaries, not rescue orders. Tom's pulse thudded once, hard. There's nothing I can do, Captain. Ethan studied him, eyes sharp but not pleading. Maybe not officially, but sometimes the sky still remembers the hands that flew it. He placed a small metal coin on the table, a unit challenge coin, scratched and dulled by years. We carried your name on the back of ours. It means you came home so we could. He nodded once and walked away, leaving the coin glinting under the flickering light. Tom stared at it until the room emptied. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls. Ranger rested his head on Tom's boot, eyes half closed but ears twitching at every gust. Don't look at me like that, Tom muttered, pocketing the coin. I'm too old for this. But deep down, he felt the truth rumble like distant thunder, the kind that warns the ground before the lightning finds it. Somewhere far across the world, men were dying in a canyon that had once tried to kill him too. He rose slowly, joints aching, heart heavier than the snow outside. As he walked back toward Hangar 3, Ranger padded close behind. Through the storm, the hangar lights shimmered faintly, as if waiting. The A-10 stood in shadow, silent but not asleep. Tom stopped at the threshold, his breath a pale mist in the cold air. "Don't even think about it," he whispered to himself. But the jet, old and scarred like him, seemed to listen. And when lightning flashed outside, the metal glinted like an open eye. The next morning broke heavy and gray, snow falling in thick silence that swallowed even the sound of engines on the base. The storm hadn't passed. It had only settled, patient and suffocating. Tom Walker stood by the window of his small trailer, coffee in hand, watching the snow drift across the tarmac like ghosts retracing old routes. He hadn't slept. The challenge coin from Ethan Hale lay on the table beside him, dull in the half-light. He turned it over and over in his fingers, the metal cold enough to sting. 2009. No one left behind. The motto stared back at him, and for the first time in years, Tom didn't know whether it was memory or guilt keeping him awake. Behind him, Ranger, his German shepherd, stirred on the floor. The dog's thick winter coat shimmered in the pale dawn light, and when Tom turned, Ranger was already watching him, ears forward, golden eyes sharp. He had that look, the one he'd worn back when they still wore unit tags together, when every dawn might have been their last. "Don't start with me," Tom muttered, scratching behind the dog's ear. "You're worse than a conscience." Ranger licked his wrist once and padded to the door, tail thumping softly, a silent question Tom didn't want to answer. The knock came at 6:40, sharp, deliberate. Tom opened the door to find Grace Whitman standing there in a gray overcoat, snowflakes clinging to her shoulders. Her posture, as always, was composed, chin high, eyes the color of cold steel. But today there was fatigue in the way she held herself, the kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from the weight of command. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. Her tone was polite but carried that undertone of inevitability soldiers recognize. You could say no, but it wouldn't matter. Tom stepped aside. "You didn't come for coffee, I bet." Grace took off her gloves, folding them with precise movements. "Ethan Hale reported to command at 400. He's pushing for authorization of an extraction in 7C. Tom's jaw tightened. "He's wasting his breath." "Maybe not," she said quietly. "We reviewed old mission logs. Your name came up. You know that canyon better than anyone alive." Tom set his cup down, the ceramic clinking softly. "And most of the ones who don't." Grace studied him a moment before speaking again. "You've still got the reflexes, Tom. Maintenance checked the sim data from your training module last year. You passed the advanced maneuver drills in half the average time." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "You spying on janitors now?" "Just the ones who used to save people." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind screamed through the metal siding, rattling loose bolts like the pulse of a machine remembering it had a heart. Grace finally broke the silence. "I won't order you," she said. "But the men out there, they're dying, Tom, and command's out of names." When she left, the trailer felt colder. Ranger whined softly and nosed the coin on the table until it fell into Tom's palm. The old man sighed. "You too, huh?" He pocketed the coin, threw on his parka, and stepped into the storm. He found Ethan Hale by the flight line, standing with a headset slung around his neck, the wind whipping at his short-cropped hair. His face looked harder in daylight. Square jaw, dark stubble, a long scar running just beneath his right eye. The kind of mark that didn't come from recklessness, but from doing what others wouldn't. "You shouldn't be out here," Ethan said, though the corner of his mouth lifted faintly. "The snow doesn't care for old bones." Tom ignored the jab. You're still pushing that rescue? I don't push. I fight, Ethan said, his voice low but certain. We lost 2 men yesterday. The rest are running out of time. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled satellite photo, the image grainy and streaked with interference. Their last known position, north face of the canyon. There's no line of sight. Drones can't get in. We need someone who can thread that maze. Tom studied the photo. Even blurred, he recognized the topography. Narrow ridges, sharp wind tunnels, no exit except the sky. You think I'm some kind of miracle, Hale? That plane's been grounded for a decade. Not the plane, Ethan said. You. Before Tom could respond, a voice called from across the flight line. Sarah Deacon, the base medical officer, approached, bundled in a thick navy coat, her blonde hair escaping her cap in loose strands. In her early 40s, she carried herself with a calm that came from patching more soldiers than she could remember. Her green eyes were tired but kind, and there was an unspoken tenderness in the way she glanced at Tom, respect shaded by worry. If you two are planning something stupid, she said, I want it on record that I advised against it. Ethan smiled faintly. You always do, Doc. Sarah shook her head. And you never listen. Tom looked at her. Still saving broken men? Only the ones too stubborn to stay alive, she said. Then softer. You were one of the lucky few. Luck had nothing to do with it. It never does, she murmured. When she walked away, her figure blurred into the snow, leaving behind only the faint scent of antiseptic and cold air. Ethan looked at Tom again. So? You going to sit on the ground while my men freeze in that canyon? Tom turned his eyes to the horizon where the storm thickened like smoke. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. He thought of Mia, his granddaughter, the little girl who waited for him every Sunday call, who believed her grandfather was still a hero. Promise me you'll always come home, she'd said once, voice small and certain. He'd promised. God help him. He'd meant it. By afternoon, the storm had grown worse, grounding all scheduled flights. The base was locked down, only emergency crews allowed near the hangars. Tom used the chaos to slip back into Hangar 3. The A-10 waited under the fluorescent hum, its body gleaming faintly with condensation. Ranger padded beside him, nails clicking softly on the concrete. Tom ran a gloved hand along the wing. You ever think about what we'd do if the world asked again? He whispered. A movement caught his eye, someone standing near the control panel. Sergeant Miles Reed, the mechanic from before, leaned against the railing, arms crossed, expression caught between concern and curiosity. You planning a joyride, old man? Tom frowned. Just checking on the relic. Reed smirked. Right. And I polish tanks for fun. He walked closer, voice lowering. They're saying command's desperate. I know that look, Walker. You're thinking about it. Tom met his gaze. Thinking doesn't mean doing. In your case, it usually does. Reed's tone softened. If you're really going, at least let me make sure the bird can fly. Tom hesitated, then nodded. Reed climbed the ladder, hands moving with the instinct of a man who'd kept too many ghosts flying. Systems might need coaxing, he muttered. But she'll wake up. The radio on the wall crackled suddenly, a fragment of static breaking through. Bravo 9, down to 5, heavy fire, request, any air support. The signal faded into white noise. Reed froze. Tom felt his pulse hammer in his ears. Ranger whined sharply, pacing in circles. Reed looked down from the cockpit. That's them. Tom's voice came out low, rough. Yeah. Outside, the storm screamed louder, pelting the hangar doors with sleet. The lights flickered once, twice. Tom stared at the control panel, the switches lined like waiting confessions. He could almost hear the engines purring under his palms. Then, softly, almost to himself, he said, "Some promises don't get to retire." Ranger barked once. Sharp, urgent. The old pilot lifted his head. "Maybe it's time, boy," he whispered. "Maybe it's time we see if ghosts still fly." And as lightning cracked across the horizon, the hangar lights flickered again, this time staying on. Night fell heavy over Idaho, thick with snow that blurred the horizon into a single sheet of gray. The airfield was nearly deserted. Curfew locked every non-essential crew inside their barracks, and the storm erased sound until even engines seemed afraid to breathe. But in Hangar 3, light still bled through the frosted windows. Inside, Tom Walker stood before the A-10 Warthog, gloves on, parka unzipped, the coin from Ethan Hale tucked inside his breast pocket like a heartbeat he couldn't quiet. The old jet loomed over him, its shark mouth faint beneath the frost, its frame massive yet familiar. It was more than metal. It was memory, defiance, and unfinished duty forged into shape. Ranger, the German shepherd, paced by his feet. The dog's breath fogged in the cold, his fur damp with melted snow. He gave a soft growl as the hangar door groaned under the weight of the wind. "Yeah, I hear it too," Tom muttered, voice gravelly. "The storm's got teeth tonight." He climbed the ladder to the cockpit, boots slipping once on the metal rungs. His hands, scarred, veins raised like old maps, trembled only until they touched the controls. Then, instinct replaced age. He brushed the frost off the dials, the smell of oil and metal filling his lungs like oxygen. "Let's see if you've still got a pulse," he said to the aircraft. From the shadows near the back, Sergeant Miles Reed appeared, carrying a toolbox and wearing his usual stained overalls. Snow clung to his beard, and fatigue darkened his eyes, but determination kept him steady. "You really gonna do this, old man?" he asked, voice low but clear. "You came back," Tom replied without looking up. "Didn't want your ghost haunting me," Reed said, setting the box down. "Besides, somebody's got to keep you from killing yourself." He cracked his knuckles, moving toward the service panel. "Fuel lines are still clean. Hydraulics, well, they're cranky, but so am I." Tom gave a rare smile. "You've always been a better mechanic than you admit. And you've always been worse at retirement than you claim," Reed shot back. They worked in silence after that, the kind of silence built on years of unspoken trust. Ranger sat near the door, ears twitching at every gust, as though keeping watch for whatever ghosts the storm carried. By 23:15, the power was rerouted, the auxiliary battery humming like a heartbeat beneath the fuselage. Tom lowered himself into the seat, its leather cracked but familiar. The switches felt like old comrades, each one a memory waiting to be awakened. When he flipped the primary power, the canopy lights flickered, then glowed amber. The cockpit screens blinked alive. The A-10 stirred, shuddering like something rousing from a long, reluctant sleep. "Easy, girl," Tom whispered. "You've been asleep too long." Reed leaned against the frame, watching the old man move through startup sequences from muscle memory alone. "You realize what's going to happen when command sees this, right?" Tom didn't answer. He was already lost in the rhythm, the checklist that had once meant life or death. Battery, generator, fuel pump, ignition. The engines coughed once, then again. A plume of smoke burst from the exhaust, mixing with the snow outside. Reed took a step back, eyes wide. "Jesus, she's actually alive." She always was, Tom murmured. A klaxon wailed across the base, the unmistakable alarm of unauthorized launch prep. Red lights began to spin through the storm outside, painting the hangar walls in pulses of blood red. Over the radio, a clipped female voice came through. "This is command. All unauthorized activity in Hangar 3. Cease immediately. Repeat, cease immediately." Reed turned toward Tom. "They'll be here in minutes." "Then I better make them count," Tom said, voice steady. He looked down at Ranger, who barked once, sharp and determined. "You stay," Tom ordered. "Watch our home." The dog tilted his head, whined, but obeyed, sitting by the hangar door like a sentry carved from loyalty itself. Grace Whitman's SUV skidded to a stop outside, tires cutting deep lines through the snow. She stepped out without hesitation, the wind slapping her coat against her legs. Her dark hair whipped loose from its bun, strands sticking to her cheek. She looked younger in the chaos, alive, fierce. 2 MPs followed her, both in full winter gear, their rifles slung but not raised. "Tom!" she shouted over the wind as she burst into the hangar. "You're grounding this right now." Tom didn't look back. The engines of the A-10 whined higher, trembling at the edge of ignition. The sound filled the hangar like thunder waiting for permission. "Can't do that, Grace," he said through the intercom, his voice echoing through the space. "There are 5 men out there still breathing because they think someone's coming." Grace stood at the base of the ladder, staring up through the canopy glass. For a long moment, she said nothing. The MPs hesitated behind her, waiting for orders. Then, softly, almost inaudible through the storm, she said, "Don't make me the one who has to stop you." Tom's eyes met hers through the glass. They both knew what this was: disobedience, defiance, redemption. "You won't have to," he said. "You've been in my seat before. You know what it means when you've run out of options but still got air under your wings." She took one step back. Her jaw clenched, but her hand stayed away from the radio. "Godspeed, Walker." Tom nodded once, the faintest smile crossing his face. He pushed the throttle. The A-10 roared to life, turbines screaming like a beast unchained. The ground trembled beneath its weight as the snow scattered across the hangar floor. Reed shielded his eyes, shouting over the noise, "You better bring that bird home." The hangar doors began to open, hydraulics groaning under the strain. Outside, the runway stretched endless and white, the blizzard slicing sideways through the floodlights. Grace stepped aside as the jet rolled forward, heat from the exhaust melting trails in the snow. Ranger barked wildly, tail whipping, as if trying to chase the beast he once guarded. Tom guided the Warthog onto the runway. The engines screamed higher, thunder building behind him. Through the canopy, the world looked like a blur of silver and fury. His hands tightened around the stick. Every nerve, every scar, every breath he'd carried for 65 years aligned in that moment. "Let's finish this," he whispered. He hit the throttle. The A-10 shot forward, slicing through the snowstorm like a memory refusing to die. The storm lit up under the flare of its engines. Then the plane lifted, wheels folding beneath it, swallowed by the night. Grace watched it vanish into the white sky, her breath trembling in the cold. Reed exhaled, shaking his head. "He's insane," he said softly. "No," Grace replied, her eyes never leaving the sky. "He's a pilot." And far above them, through layers of snow and cloud, a faint voice crackled through the base radio, Tom's, steady as iron. "This is Warthog 1, en route to 7C. The radio hissed with static. Then silence. The Afghan night was a furnace of smoke and wind. Even through the cockpit's thick glass, Tom Walker could feel the turbulence hammering his ribs like a second heartbeat. The A-10 Warthog, call sign Warthog 1, trembled beneath him, every bolt and rivet moaning as if the old bird knew this might be her last flight. Outside, the canyon walls of Sector 7C closed in like jaws made of stone, jagged cliffs slicing the sky to ribbons. The radar screamed with static, but Tom didn't need it. He flew by feel, by instinct, by scars burned into his muscle memory from another life. "Bravo 9, this is Warthog 1. Smoke your position," Tom said, voice gravel over the comm. Static hissed, then came a hoarse reply. Ethan Hale. "Copy, Warthog 1. We've got purple smoke on the ridge. Hostiles moving in from the east. Multiple RPGs." Tom's eyes narrowed. RPGs. He flexed his hand on the stick, rolling the jet hard left. The horizon vanished. Mountains spun. His stomach pressed against his ribs as the A-10 dove through a corridor barely wider than its wings. Flashes of muzzle fire stitched across the dark like angry stars. He thumbed the switch on his control panel. "Let's sing, girl." The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared, a mechanical hymn of thunder and fire. Orange tracers rained down the cliffs, pulverizing the ridgeline where insurgents crouched. The ground erupted in flame and dust. "That's for the boys," Tom muttered, banking away as shrapnel ricocheted off the fuselage. On the ground, Ethan Hale crouched behind a fractured boulder, his beard coated in ash. Blood slicked his temple, eyes squinting against the light. Around him, the surviving SEALs moved like shadows, firing bursts into the smoke. One of them, Corporal Davis, barely 22, freckles lost under grime, shouted over the chaos, "Sir, that old bird's ours?" Ethan grinned, teeth red. "Yeah, kid, that's him." Another explosion rocked the ridge, sending rocks tumbling. "Move!" Ethan barked. They scrambled for cover as Tom swooped low again, engines screaming through the narrow canyon. The Warthog's wings almost kissed the cliffs. Below, fire spread in streaks of molten orange. At the base command center, half a world away in Idaho, Grace Whitman stood rigid before the operations screen. Her hair clung damp to her temples. Her hands were clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white. "Talk to me," she demanded. Major Elise Turner, pale and trembling, worked the console beside her. "Signal's weak, ma'am. We're picking up intermittent voice transmission. No telemetry data." "Patch me in." Elise hesitated. "If he's flying that low, we could disrupt his feed." Grace's jaw tightened. "Then whisper a prayer and do it." Back in the canyon, Tom caught the faint voice through his comm. Grace's. "Warthog 1, this is command. You are flying blind in restricted range. Do you copy?" Tom smiled faintly beneath his oxygen mask. "You copy that command. Blind's how I see best." He climbed sharply, breaking through a thin veil of smoke. The canyon opened into a wide basin below, a graveyard of wrecked metal, the ghosts of downed helicopters and scorched trucks from missions long forgotten. The wrecks glimmered in the moonlight like bones. "Hell of a view," Tom whispered. "Sir, we've got a heat signature." Ethan's voice cut in, static distorted. "Missile lock." Tom jerked the controls. The alarm shrieked. "Missile inbound." A white plume streaked up from the ridge. He punched the flare release, bright sparks trailing like shooting stars. The missile curved, confused, then reacquired. "Clever bastard," Tom hissed. He pulled the throttle, rolling the A-10 into a vertical climb, engines howling like an old lion defying the inevitable. The missile followed, closing fast. "Come on. Come on." He yanked the stick back, performing a stall maneuver that no flight instructor would ever approve of. The plane shuddered violently, nose pointing skyward before dropping like a stone. The missile overshot, streaking into the clouds. Tom gritted his teeth, then slammed the throttle forward. The engines sputtered, coughed, then caught with a roar. "Still got it," he growled. Below, Ethan watched the sky explode with light. "He did it," whispered Davis, disbelief mixing with awe. "He damn well did it." Tom leveled out barely 50 feet above the canyon floor. The left wing was smoking, warning lights flashing red across his console. "You've got 5 minutes to evac," he called. "Chinook inbound corridor clear." Ethan turned toward his surviving team. "Move to extraction point. Double time." He grabbed Davis by the vest. "You carry that wounded man like he's your brother, because that's what he is." Davis nodded, dragging Petty Officer Ruiz, mid-30s, dark-skinned, one leg bloodied, but still gripping his rifle. Ruiz gritted his teeth. "You always get the fun assignments, Hale." "Just once," Ethan said. "I'd like to retire before 60. The Chinook appeared on the far ridge, its rotors cutting the smoke. Ethan fired a flare to mark their position, purple smoke rising like a beacon of stubborn hope. "Got you," Tom murmured. He banked the A-10 again, sweeping over the ridge, suppressing enemy fire with the cannon until his ammo counter blinked near empty. "You're clear," he radioed. As the SEALs clambered into the Chinook, Ethan looked up through the chaos. The Warthog streaked overhead, trailing smoke but steady, the cannon still glowing red from overuse. "Walker," he whispered, "you crazy old bastard." On the other end of the radio, Grace's voice came through faintly, breaking up. "Warthog 1, status?" Tom chuckled dryly. "Still airborne, ma'am. Mostly. We're tracking multiple fires on your port wing. You need to turn back." "Not yet," Tom said. "Got a few angels left in this canyon." He made one final pass, strafing the last enemy position until the cliffs themselves seemed to crumble. Then silence. The firing stopped. Only wind remained. "Bravo 9 is clear," Ethan reported. "We're outbound?" Tom smiled behind the mask. "Good. Someone's got to tell the story." He eased the throttle, glancing at the warning lights blinking across his panel. The left engine temperature was climbing. Too high. The bird was bleeding out. "Command, this is Warthog 1, he said softly. "Mission accomplished. Recommend sending whiskey for the boys when they land." In Idaho, Grace exhaled shakily. "Copy that, Warthog 1. Bring her home." Tom didn't answer. The radio hissed. The engine coughed again. Ranger's empty collar tag. He'd tied it to the dashboard before takeoff, jingled faintly with the vibration. He touched it once, almost tenderly. "Guess we're both too stubborn to quit, huh?" Outside, the canyon opened toward the desert horizon. The first light of dawn crept over the ridges. For the briefest moment, it painted the A-10 in gold, like a relic ascending from shadow. But as Tom adjusted the throttle, the warning lights flared red again. Hydraulic failure. The stick stiffened in his grip. "Easy, girl," he whispered, sweat freezing on his brow. "Just a little farther." The sky ahead shimmered, peaceful and deadly. Somewhere far behind, Ethan's voice came faint and cracking. "Walker, you turned that canyon into a way home." Tom smiled faintly. "That's what we do, son." And then the radio fell silent. Just the hum of the storm and the heartbeat of a dying engine. The storm had followed him home. Over the Idaho mountains, snow fell in slow, endless spirals, swallowing the horizon into white oblivion. Inside the cockpit of the wounded A-10 Warthog, Tom Walker fought the shuddering stick with both hands, muscles screaming against the resistance. The left engine trailed black smoke like a dying comet, and the warning lights pulsed red across the console. Hydraulic failure. Fuel pressure low. Flight control limited. The cabin smelled of burnt oil and metal, and every vibration carried the whisper of collapse. But beneath the roar of the storm, he could still hear the faint hum of the GAU-8 cannon cooling in the belly of the aircraft, a heartbeat refusing to quit. "Come on, girl," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You brought me home once. One more time." At Mountain Home Air Base, floodlights stabbed through the snow, casting halos of light across the runway. Inside the control tower, Grace Whitman stood rigid in her headset, eyes fixed on the radar screen that flickered between signal and static. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the console. "Tower to Warthog 1, you are cleared for emergency landing. Runway 09. Winds cross at 30 knots. Do you copy?" Silence. Then, crackling through the interference, Tom's voice answered, gravelly, calm, impossibly composed. "Copy that command. Coming in blind. Tell the snow to hold its breath." "Copy, Warthog 1, Grace said, lowering her headset for a moment, closing her eyes. Behind her, Major Elise Turner, her copper hair messy from sleepless hours, handed her a clipboard. "Ma'am, medical and fire crews are ready. We've got visual, barely. He's coming in hot." Grace nodded. "He's coming in home." On the tarmac, Sergeant Miles Reed waited in a reflective vest near the fire trucks. His beard was crusted with frost, and his breath came in clouds. He'd worked on too many wrecks to mistake optimism for luck. "You crazy old man," he muttered under his breath, staring into the snowstorm. "Don't you dare make me scrape what's left of that bird off the ice." A low rumble answered him, distant at first, then swelling until the ground itself trembled. The shape emerged through the snow like a phantom, the Warthog lurching, one engine dead, one coughing flame. Sparks trailed from its landing gear. Tom's hands trembled, sweat freezing on his temples, his vision blurred, but instinct kept him alive. He adjusted flaps manually, hydraulics gone, and braced for impact. The world turned into white noise and shaking metal. The Warthog slammed into the runway, bouncing once, twice. Metal screamed. One tire exploded, spraying debris like shrapnel. Tom pulled against the stick, the plane fishtailing violently, snow blasting against the cockpit glass. "Easy, girl, easy!" He feathered the throttle, killed the live engine, and let the beast drag itself forward until it slowed to a wounded crawl. The nose dipped, the landing gear groaned, and then, finally, silence. In the tower, Grace exhaled. "Touchdown," Elise whispered, eyes wet. "He made it." Outside, emergency crews raced across the ice. Reed was first to reach the cockpit, pounding his gloved fist against the canopy. "Open it, damn it!" For a moment, nothing. Then, with a mechanical sigh, the canopy hissed open. Steam poured out, mingling with the snow. Tom sat slumped in the seat, oxygen mask cracked, face gray with exhaustion. But his eyes, blue and bright, were alive. "Nice parking job," Reed said, grinning shakily. "You dented my runway." Tom's lips twitched. Runway needed character. Reed reached up and helped him unbuckle, his thick hands surprisingly gentle. "Let's get you out before this thing decides it's done keeping secrets." Tom swung one leg over the cockpit edge, boots slipping on the icy fuselage. Before he could step down, a bark cut through the chaos. Ranger. The German shepherd tore through the snow from the rescue truck, his coat glistening wet, eyes wide and wild. He leapt onto Tom's chest, almost knocking him backward, whining and pressing his muzzle against the old man's face. Tom laughed, a raw, broken sound, and buried his hand in the dog's fur. "Good boy," he whispered. "Told you I'd come back." Through the curtain of snow, another figure appeared, a small shape running, stumbling, arms outstretched. Mia, 8 years old, cheeks flushed red under a wool hat too big for her, her mittens mismatched. Her mother, Sarah Deacon, the base medic, followed close behind, face pale with tears and relief. Mia threw herself into Tom's arms, clutching his neck. "You promised," she sobbed. "You said you'd always come home." Tom's voice trembled as he held her tight. "And I did, sweetheart. I did." Ranger circled them, tail sweeping the snow, barking like laughter. Grace approached, her boots crunching over the ice, coat flaring in the wind. For once, the weight of rank had left her shoulders. She looked simply like a woman watching a friend return from death. "You broke every rule in the book," she said softly. "You could have been court-martialed." Tom met her eyes. "Some chapters ain't written fast enough. Somebody's got to fill in the blanks." Grace's expression wavered between reprimand and admiration. "Those men, Bravo 9, they made it home because of you." He looked past her to the snow, where rescue lights flickered against the darkness. "Then I guess we all did." Reed laughed, the sound half a sob. "You're a damn legend, Walker. Gonna have to rename the hangar after you." Tom shook his head. "Don't. Legends die too loud. I just did my part." Grace turned toward the waiting medics. "Get him checked out." "Already fine," Tom said, waving them off, but his body betrayed him with a slight stumble. Sarah caught his arm, her gloved hand steady. "You're not as unbreakable as you think, Captain." "Wasn't trying to be," he said quietly, "just trying to keep my word." As they led him toward the rescue vehicle, the wind began to ease. The snow, once violent, now drifted gently, soft, forgiving. Tom looked back one last time at the Warthog. Fire crews sprayed foam over its smoking frame, but in the haze of white, it almost looked peaceful, like an old warrior laid to rest. Grace stood beside him. "You'll have to explain this to command," she said, though her tone lacked any real authority. "Let me know when they start writing a regulation for miracles," he replied. They shared a brief, knowing smile. Mia tugged his sleeve, voice small. "Grandpa, can we go home now?" He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her cheek. "Home's not a place, kiddo. It's the people waiting." Ranger barked once, as if agreeing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, far across the tarmac, the wind carried a faint metallic clang. The A-10's nose cone shifting slightly, a single sound echoing through the night. Reed turned toward it, brow furrowed. "Did you hear that?" he murmured. Tom's gaze lingered on the jet, its silhouette ghostly under the floodlights. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw the cockpit lights flicker just once, before dying again. He smiled faintly. Old girls saying good night. But above them, unseen through the storm, the northern sky shimmered faintly with green light, the aurora slicing through the clouds as if the heavens themselves had saluted. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, through the hands of those who refuse to give up. That night in Idaho wasn't about a plane or a soldier. It was about faith. Faith that even in our weakest hour, God still guides trembling hands to steady wings. Tom didn't bring his brothers home because of luck. He did it because grace still moves through broken people who keep their promises. Maybe you've fought your own storms lately, battles no one sees, canyons of fear only you can fly through. But if this story has taught us anything, it's that we are never truly alone in the cockpit. Sometimes the voice that whispers, "You can make it home," isn't your own. It's him. So tonight, as the snow settles over your world, take a moment to breathe, to pray, and to thank God for the quiet miracles that still happen around us. The loyal friends who never leave, the family who waits, and the strength that comes when everything else runs out. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little faith today. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide your heart through every storm you face.